We're really happy to be here, my colleagues and I. My name is Sophie Halliday. I'm Director of Educational Programs at St. Andrew's Schools. And I will do a much better introduction of my colleagues here, but just want to thank you again for taking the time and joining us today. We're going to talk about some of the SEL programs that we have been implementing at our school and the joys and challenges of implementing our programs at our schools. So just a little bit of a background of how all of this came to be. We're just so grateful to the Hawaii Community Foundation and the Pillars of Peace initiative sponsored by the Hawaii Community Foundation. We're here thanks to their generous support. And the Pillars of Peace program, if you folks are not familiar, this program really tries to be a catalyst for understanding more about the role of compassion, diversity, and culture in the practice of peace. It encourages our community to engage in the acts of peace and aloha in our daily lives. And it helps us to grow ethical and compassionate leaders for Hawaii's future. So a really worthy initiative. And the primary goal of the SEL program that Pillars of Peace is sponsoring is to integrate and embed SEL into Hawaii schools to support the development of Hawaii's youth. And so the Pillars of Peace and the Hawaii Community Foundation have done really great work supporting the Seeds of Peace program. And they've worked hard with HIS to develop the SEL track for this conference, Schools of the Future conference. And in addition to that, they began a pilot in 2015 with 9 schools to look at sort of the implementation challenges of various SEL tools. And then in 2016, they began another 3-year pilot to demonstrate the efficacy, gain lessons learned, and showcase a variety of SEL tools being used in 11 schools. And we are part of the 11 schools cohort that are engaging in that 3-year pilot. So I'd like to take a moment to just introduce to you our panelists for today. We have Chris Zorn here of UH Lab School. And Chris has been working for the past 15 years at University Laboratory School, and he's integrated SEL and contemplative practices into music that he creates in art and multimedia classes with students at every grade level, and he helps to coordinate SEL implementation efforts at his school. And he will be talking about Toolbox, Voices of Literature and Writing, and Facing History and Ourselves today. Mary Burgess, sitting right here, a dear colleague of mine from St. Andrew's Schools. She is our K-12 mindfulness education coordinator at our school, St. Andrew's Schools. And she has worked very hard to integrate mindfulness and mindfulness practices into all of our student population. And most recently, she is helping us to implement the Ruler program, which is what she will be talking primarily about today. And then we have Rhonda Hayashi Simpliciano, and she's from Anuenue. We're so happy to have her here today. She is a vice principal at Anuenue, and she's been part of the DOE school as an administrator for 4 years. And Rhonda also is part of the 3rd doctoral cohort at UH Manoa in the Educational Professional Practice track. And her research interests surround the intersections of education, hip hop, Indigenous identity, and social emotional learning, which is really cool. So she is currently sits on the Anuenue SEL team, and this team has school administrators, teachers, counselors who are collaboratively using Kanaka Maoli lens to examine SEL program implementation. And then finally, we have Layla Schuster of Honolulu Waldorf School, and she has worked in New York City, working with art and storytelling projects, bringing elderly residents of Queens and immigrant youth together. And most recently, she's been working with Honolulu Waldorf School, where she is the SEL coordinator. And so she works with programs such as No Bully and Roots of Empathy to encourage understanding and compassion between students. So we're really happy to have our panelists here today. They're the boots on the ground, really making things happen at their school. So I would just like to sort of go down our panelists and just maybe have them take a minute or two describing the programs that they're working with. So Chris, if you can start us off.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thanks, Sophie, for putting this together. I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to get to understand a little bit about what's happening in Hawaii already, because SEL is pretty new here. At the University Laboratory School, our main SEL program is a program called Toolbox, which is part of the Toolbox Project, which is a human development project. And that program is, it's pretty unique. And it really speaks to helping students become their own agents. It brings out the agency, brings out what's within. That's sort of one of the main metaphors. And I think one of the things that really characterizes that program is its flexibility, its ability to be integrated in many, many different areas and subject areas. We also are using, and we're doing that program right now currently in K through 8. Another program we're using is called Voices, Literature, and Writing, which is an additional language arts program for the elementary K. We're using that K through 5. And then we also are working with Facing History in Ourselves, which is mostly an upper grade, 6 through 12. And we're just starting to use that program a little bit. It's sort of a volunteer basis. We have maybe a handful of teachers who are working with lessons from that program.
We're just going down or shift? Okay. All right, so at the Honolulu Waldorf School, we also have 2 SEL programs. I'm going to mostly be talking about No Bully because we're just still going to implement Roots of Empathy, but I'll touch on both. So No Bully is a non-punitive, empathy-based social intervention model, and it's really given our school a highly effective, immediate way to deal with bullying behavior. And it also gives the students the ability to practice empathy and to practice their problem-solving skills. So that's been great for us. There's a few steps to the No Bully program. First is kind of a school-wide agreement to create a school culture in which you're willing to interrupt pre-bullying behavior. So students being mean to each other, teasing each other, anything like that, that you would say something. Oh, it sounds like you were teasing Joey, and please, I'm sorry, and that at our school we are kind to each other. So that's really the first step. And then the second step is to check in with students who look like they're not doing well, whether they're by themselves on the playground or looking sad. And then if we find that there is a bullying situation, we deal with it in this special way. We call a solution team together. And a solution team is a group of about 6 to 8 students. And what makes this No Bully model a little bit different is on this team are not only the allies and friends of the target, but the bully and bully's friends and the bystanders. And you gather them together and you say, so you're not in any trouble. We're here today because we have a problem, and we've been especially chosen because we think you can help solve it. And that's how you begin a solution team. So just as an example, when you start to talk to the solution team, you're going to tell the target's story. The target's not going to be there, and the target story might be something like Sarah's not feeling, she's feeling really sad. She doesn't want to come to school because she knows she's going to be teased. People are going to call her fat and ugly, and it's really making her anxious and worried. And not only that, at the recess time, nobody wants to play with her. So you start to tap the empathy, they call it, get those students in the shoes of your target. And you might hear at this point something like, Sarah, she picks her nose. It's really gross. And that's a moment for you to acknowledge and say, yes, I can bring that back to Sarah as something she can work on. But have you ever felt like you didn't want to come to school because of what someone might say to you? And so again, you're drawing that empathy, allowing them to have a moment to step in someone else's shoes. And once that's happened, you can go to part 2. I'm not going to go too much further with this, but part 2 is really this idea that what could you do? What's one thing you can do this week that would or not do that would help the situation? And this is the moment where you leave it in the student's lap and you take a few suggestions. You say, great, we'll see you, I'm going to check in with you next week and see how it's gone. So that's the solution team, and it's been really helpful and effective at our school. So thank you.
Hi. Did you want
I can talk to Roots of Empathy later.
Okay. Thank you all for being here, and thanks, Sophie, for the opportunity. I am here in representation of Ruler. Ruler is from out of Yale's Center for Emotional Intelligence, and Ruler is this beautiful acronym for recognize, understand, label, express appropriately, and regulating our emotions. So it's a very in-depth look at our emotions, and it's seeking to promote emotional intelligence not only in our students, but also with our staff, faculty, and families. And that's a great thing about this program. So it provides 4 anchor tools that we become familiar with throughout the implementation. And one of the anchor tools is this really great and intuitive and fun way to plot yourself at any given time as far as your emotion that you're experiencing in that moment. And maybe some of you folks were here last year. Mark Brackett, Dr. Mark Brackett was here as a keynote speaking to this program as well. So maybe you guys might have seen this before. But it looks at energy levels and also at pleasantness. So you just kind of take a moment to examine the emotion that you're experiencing, and then you're able to name it and label it and kind of give it a tangible. So it's this great tool and very fun to use. And Dr. Fletcher, our head of school, loves to implement it with faculty at all times. And we do it in faculty meetings. We implement it with morning check-ins with the students. So it's this beautiful way of integration into the whole school. There's also the anchor tool of the charter, which asks 3 questions, very important questions. The first question being, how do we want to feel when we are at school? And so it's allowing the space for not only students, again, but also faculty and staff and families to examine the question, how do we want to feel, and expressing that. And then also the second question being, what are the behaviors we're going to do in order to perpetuate these feelings or cultivate these feelings as we move throughout our school year? And the third being, when these feelings aren't being felt, which that is reality, and when conflict does arise, what behaviors can we establish in order to sort of get us back on track and continue those emotions? And so there's 2 other anchor tools, the meta moment and the blueprint. And the meta moment is looking at responding versus reacting, sort of a 6-step process. and also the blueprint is conflict resolution sort of script. So these are lovely tools that we've been using and continuing to roll out with our students this year. We've rolled it out with faculty and staff, and we're so grateful to have the program. And I will pass it on to you.
Aloha mai kako. So at Kekulakai Punio Anuenue, we face cultural and linguistic challenges when implementing, I think, any SEL program. So in the beginning of our journey, our core SEL team became trained in tribes. Tribes, I think, is used as a foundational roadmap for us in terms of SEL, but we are not a tribe school. And we found that there were things culturally that we had to adapt some things for ourselves for the Kanaka Maoli lens. But certainly, tribes acts as that roadmap as we begin to build one language, one understanding among our students and our teachers about the importance of inclusion, community building, conflict resolution, and so on. But currently what we're doing is we're developing our own program from a Kanaka Maoli lens that we call Hana Kukulu Pilina, or relationship building. The other program that has been a real blessing that's come into our school, in addition to tribes, has been Roots of Empathy. So I don't know how many of you are familiar, but with Roots of Empathy, a baby is brought into the classroom, and for us, the agreement was that we would bring in Roots of Empathy. We would have a trainer from our school that's fluent in Hawaiian be the kumu, and she would do the translation. So we would actually change the language of instruction. And so there were things that were a real natural fit because there was a baby involved. It culturally, and for the fluent speakers in the room, you know that the I is many times removed from the conversation. So culturally, some of the prompts were a little strange for our students, but we found that the use of the baby really helped students identify what they were feeling. And so part of what we do now with Hana Kukulu Pilina, because there's a temporary hold on Roots because of the mumps, and so we can't bring babies in to do this curriculum at this time, was use the Kanaka Maoli tradition of kua'ana kaikaina, so older sibling, younger sibling. So part of what we do in Hana Kukulu Pilina is to teach our students the role of being the older sibling, the younger sibling, to honor their moku auhau, or genealogy of their ohana, of their kumu, as well as of the aina. And we also feel that within our Hana Kukulu Pilina, it's not necessarily something that's kind of just horizontal among relationships with peers in kumu, but also the aina that the school sits on and that the children come from.
Thank you. Those are really great introductions of the programs that your schools use. And I just wanted to jump straight to the questions that we prepared for the panelists, and we're hoping that we leave about 10 minutes at the end of this session for questions from the audience. So the first question is, why did you choose your particular SEL program, and why did you feel that it was a good fit for your school? And what do you feel is the particular strength of the SEL program that you chose?
Well, when we were choosing, we actually had a committee of teachers, and we actually investigated and researched about 8 different programs, including all the ones that are represented here. And we ended up choosing Toolbox for a number of reasons. One is we felt like it was very, very flexible, but I think probably the biggest reason is we felt like it really gets to the root and heart of the issue. It's based on an incredibly simple metaphor of tools, and so the children are exposed to 12 different tools: breathing tool, quiet safe space tool, empathy tool, listening tool, things like that. And through that very simple model, they start to learn what they have inside of them, because as we teach it, we let them know that these tools reside inside of them. So we're giving them the agency and letting them realize that these are innate human qualities. And I think the reason that's such a great fit for our school too is because in our case, the teachers, as you're teaching it, you're also developing those same innate qualities. You're bringing those out in yourself as you teach. And one of the great things also is bringing out these tools. There's similar to what Layla was talking about. When you have issues with students, the teacher's no longer sort of the enforcer or the policeman. You turn it right back to the students. And we wear these lanyards. It's called fan decks. And if my good friend Mark wouldn't mind showing us one, he's got one on right back there. It's just a very, very simple tool. And it's got each of the 12 tools on it. And the teachers, we wear these all the time. And so as we're walking around, whether we're in school, whether we're in class and we're teaching, or whether we're on the playground, whether we're in the lunchroom or whatever, if we see an issue or two students are having an issue, we can just walk up to them and say, looks like you're having some problems here. And we pull out our fan deck and we say, are there some tools here that might help you solve this? And the students they see the icon for the tool, they see the gesture for the tool, they see the tagline for the tool, all right in this little fan deck. And I've had students, I'll just flip through it. Okay, no, not that one. No, not that one. Oh, yeah, that one. And I'll say, okay, and how might you apply that tool? And then they'll do what they've learned. And so it's very, in that way, there's two things that I think are really excellent about that. One is it immediately just takes the teacher out of the role of being sort of having to monitor things, and it puts it right back to the students. It also lets them know that these tools are inside of them. And I think that's probably the other thing that happens there. It's extremely flexible. This can be used anywhere. It can be used in a music and art classroom like myself. It can be used in a language arts classroom. It can be used anywhere on the playground. And it's very easy for the teachers and the students to implement it, and the students to take it home. And it's a very common thing for the students to come back and say, oh, I taught my mom the breathing tool, or my mom was having trouble this morning and I told her to use her breathing tool. So it's very easy for it to spread out into the community, which I think is another great thing. And when we were choosing programs, Ruler was one of the ones that was at the top of our list. And the reason we didn't choose Ruler is because we felt like we wanted that flexibility for each of the teachers. Ruler has a particular commitment level that is really important. And we felt like, in our case, because this was a grassroots teacher-initiated project, we didn't know if we were going to have all the teachers on board. So we didn't want to have some sort of top-down approach because we were afraid that wouldn't work for our school. And as it turns out, that's worked out pretty well because it's allowed us to sort of grow things and allow teachers to really sort of come to their own on it. And what happens, and this is probably true for many schools, but what happens is the teachers, once the teachers start to use it and they realize it's transforming their own teaching and how they relate to the children in the classroom, then the word spreads, and it also spreads through the students. You have a student that goes into one class who's not using Toolbox, and they start talking about it, and the teachers realize, oh, they're getting something from this. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think the strengths there are, it's really an internal transformation. It's a new paradigm. It's a different paradigm in terms of getting the children to understand it's their own internal agency that they have, and you're helping them connect with that. And so it's very empowering that way.
Sure. So we're also doing implementing Roots of Empathy at our school, and that's a really nice complement to the strengths of No Bully. No Bully is a kind of an interventional program, something's going wrong, and now you have a way to deal with it, which has really been great. And then Roots of Empathy is a classroom-based program, and it really focuses on emotional literacy, so growing, kind of what Chris is talking about, growing those skills in the children as they learn to recognize emotions, first in the baby, then in themselves, and then having empathy for each other. So it's kind of this great complement to the No Bully program. We chose the No Bully program for similar reasons, not wanting to start in the classroom, but rather giving a resource, a school-wide resource to our teachers, and then now growing into bringing a program into the classroom as well. Again, I think one of the most exciting things about No Bully is that nobody's stuck in their role. Bullies often do feel stuck in their role, and through this program we found them to start to make different choices, and that's really exciting for everyone. And same thing with the target. Nobody wants to be stuck in just one way of being, and it allows the whole social dynamic to change. So I think that's a huge strength of the program. Thanks.
Thank you. For Ruler, when we brought it in, it just sort of was woven in so nicely. Our school had implemented successful social emotional learning programs prior to bringing this in, and so this was really nothing terribly new or foreign to our teachers, to our students. This was a nice way to bring in a program that wasn't specific to one activity period or something extracurricular. This was a program that we thought would be perfect for integration into all classrooms, as well as sort of just the being of who we are as a school. And so it serves us as a foundational piece, and it's this very basic awareness of emotions, and with these very basic tools that we can use. And the SEL programs that existed prior kind of complement that and supplement those. And so what's really nice is, I was the mindfulness teacher before, and this is something that I can actually use within our mindfulness program. And this is something that they can use in their physics class, or that they can use in their history class. And so it's really nice in that way. And one of the things that I think really struck me when I was being trained in this program was the fact that these emotions, regardless of pleasantness or unpleasantness, I love that they use that language rather than negative versus positive. They honor all of the emotions that students might be feeling or faculty might be feeling, and they find a place for them. So we're honoring the emotion, whether it be frustration, anger, any of those maybe more unpleasant ones, and we're seeing where those actually are beneficial to us and how we can use those. So I really love that about the program, because I think all emotions are there to be felt, and sometimes there's this stigma around more unpleasant emotions. A lot of students are being told you should not be feeling that, or you need to turn that off and go here. So this is just a way of meeting them where they are and seeing what can we do with this in this moment. So that is one of the major strengths I feel. And I have a whole list of them, but I'll just give you the abbreviated version and stick with that one.
So for us, because as I said earlier, we have very particular cultural and linguistic needs, we pick tribes because tribes is not a curriculum necessarily that you have to follow with fidelity. that would be very troublesome for us because we would have to then go ahead and, translate the curriculum. But Tribes is a program, so it allowed us to be fluid. And Tribes is a beautiful program that very much is welcoming of, different cultures and different worldviews. So that was a nice match. In terms of Roots of Empathy, as we knew that we had to do it with fidelity, but they gave us the leeway of the training of our trainer, as well as the agreement that our trainer could Olalo Hawaii with our haumana, with our students. And so that was a strength. And I think doing those two programs together allowed us to pull out and understand the strengths of SEL. For my background is in public health, and so I was the coordinator for the consortium for health, safety, and support along the Waianae Coast, where we received a grant to address deaths due to intimate partner violence on the Waianae Coast. So for us in our school community, we know that almost 70% of our students are coming from the Waianae Coast. So to build emotional intelligence of our students, of our haumana, I think our whole team recognizes that it's not just about school climate. Though school climate is important in building emotional intelligence, but it truly is about the long-term wellness of our students.
Great. Thank you, Rhonda. And why don't you keep the mic, because the next question will start with you.
Okay.
Okay, so it's nice to hear the reasons why you chose the programs that you did, and what I'd really like to know is, what was that ideal mix of conditions that made implementing your program successful?
So I think the ideal mix of conditions for us was, finding these programs that would, where we could meld together the evidence-based approach of the program with a Kanaka Maoli lens. And then also working together with our staff that was open enough to understanding that, we have children that are navigating the survival of colonization, militarization. With that comes post-traumatic stress. With that comes historical trauma. And so our staff was very open to doing the work through the Mo'okuauhau genealogy for themselves. And this year we're helping our students to go ahead and understand their genealogy, where it is that they come from. But because Tribes was so fluid, as I kind of alluded to earlier, it allowed us to implement the worldview that relationship is not just necessarily with your classmate or with your kumu, but also with the land that you come from, and the land, the aina that you descend from, yeah? So for us, I think that has helped with our implementation, because our staff was able to recognize that there were elements of social intelligence that they've always done culturally, but because of the programs and because of the conversation and reflections that we're doing about that school-wide, we were able to name that and begin to develop methods around that.
So another thing that I love is top on my list about Ruler is the fact that it allows for the faculty, the teachers, to engage in the practice prior to rolling it out with their students. So when I went to this training, it wasn't oriented around delivering this to your students as much as it was to do the self-reflection. And so I think that when we came in and were able to ask the faculty and staff, how do we ourselves wish to feel, and to have that space to be able to have that discussion was awesome. And I think this was something that was really, that helped with the buy-in and seeing the value of social emotional learning I think that was already there to an extent, given that we had implemented successful social emotional learning programs. But I think this is just more to reinforce our own social emotional learning and development before and while implementing this with the students. And I think another thing that really helped was to have we talk about buy-in all the time, but to have the buy-in coming from even our head of school, who transitioned in a couple years back and is a huge advocate for emotional intelligence in schools. So to have her on our team, really kind of helps the whole integration, and I think everybody kind of can come together, and it's much more ideal in that way, rather than needing to persuade or get someone to understand the value of this. So that was definitely a great best case condition. And then also to have supportive funding, I think, for any of these programs is ideal as well. So for us to be able to do that, we're so grateful to have a grant from Pillars of Peace, Hawaii Community Foundation, and that was also one of those ideal mix of conditions there.
So I want to second that on the funding from Pillars of Peace. I think it really makes the whole thing work. And in addition to that, I think key is enthusiasm and excitement from administration and from teachers. The thing that's carried things through the most for me is when I'm working with other teachers at the school who support me, who believe in it, who are excited by it, and that keeps me going and helps me along the way. Some little things include working directly with each teacher that might be calling for a solution team, or even with the students, making it an honor, making it a special thing to be part of the team. So that's it.
I think the things that really helped us in terms of getting Toolbox up and running is just, first of all, the recognition that we had a very different situation than, say, Rhonda or Mary, where ours was a teacher-initiated process. We didn't necessarily have buy-in from the top, other than they supported our research and they supported our investigation into SEL. So for us, having Toolbox, which is a very flexible program, and also one that at the same time works on helping teachers and students learn become more emotionally literate and understand the innate faculties that we all have within us as humans. That's allowed us to implement the program and start from a place of strengths. So the teachers who understand the need and who are interested in implementing it, they find that it transforms themselves and how they teach and in their lives in general. And as a result from that excitement, then that starts to spread. And so in our school, we're having to spread it that way, as opposed to having some sort of top-down initiative or that sort of support. And I think the other thing, like they've mentioned already, is having support from the Hawaii Community Foundation as an essential condition, because to take the time out of the school day to meet with teachers, to come to training and so forth, it takes funding. And in our case, we probably would not have been able to implement an SEL program without that funding. So I think that's a really key factor for us. And I think probably the other condition is having someone at the school who is sort of like what we might call like a champion, and can go out and really support other teachers who are trying to help or trying to get it started. And then, of course, I think every time you have a success with the students, spreading that word, it's a really important aspect of growing the program. So sharing the success stories, about children, about teachers, and with and among themselves.
Thank you. I'm cognizant of time, so I know we can talk about this for hours and hours, but the next question, if we can quickly, and this will be easily rolling off your tongue, successes that you've seen that's made a deep impact, positive impact on students, faculty, staff, and leadership. Chris, start us off.
Wow. Yeah, there's lots. I think really, in some ways, I could say that the biggest successes are the smallest successes too. They're the smallest things, but they have the largest impact. For example, when a teacher turns to me and said, I realize I finally feel like I'm teaching the whole child. Something like that. And that's a teacher transformation. And then having a teacher, one of the things that we do in Toolbox that's very important is we model. So it's teachers go first. We inquire ourselves, and then we model that for students, and then they follow what we're doing. And so telling stories, having teachers tell their own stories and use the tools in the classroom themselves, so the children see the teachers doing that. And I think seeing the teachers say things like, I'm becoming more intimate with my students, and that kind of thing. And one last little thing, this happens so regularly, it's almost like I see it almost every day. I'm teaching a music class, and one of our tools is the personal space tool. And of course, you can imagine in kindergarten, this is something that's very important. So I'm teaching a music class in a really small area, and I look down and I see a 5-year-old who's about this big sitting beside a 6-year-old who's about this big, and all she has to do is she turns and goes like this. It's just a simple gesture, and they totally get it. And he moves over a little bit, no disruption in the classroom, nothing. She's just looked inside herself, found the tool that she needs, and has dealt with it. No intervention on my part whatsoever. I didn't have to get involved. And so I can either choose to say, I really appreciate, Naya, what you just did, or I can let it go and appreciate her later. But just those little kinds of things where I see 5-year-olds, reaching in and finding their own agency to solve a problem, which, personal space at the kindergarten level can be a big problem at times and really disrupt the classroom. And here they are solving these problems on their own.
So the maybe most concrete goal and success in No Bully is when a situation that seemed totally intractable and how are we going to deal with this, and is this going to turn around, actually does, and it almost always does, and that's just really exciting to see students who are stuck in the role of bully finding another way to be in the world, and that a new social dynamic is in place. But something that's maybe I was a little bit more surprised by was the second meeting in the solution teams is a very exciting one. In the first meeting, you're really just setting it up, but you're not seeing the work done, and you often kind of come away feeling like, is this going to work? I've just placed this with the students, and I don't know if these students who have just been mean to each other are actually going to change. And the second meeting can be very exciting because they come back really enthusiastic, excited to share what they've done. I invited him to sit by me, or I, played ball with him the other day. Little things, like what you were saying, but very exciting for them. And once this is in a meeting that they had been saying, I despise this kid, or I'm so annoyed by him. The second meeting, these students came back, and one shared with me that he'd been aware of the situation, but he didn't think it was his responsibility to do anything about it, but that having gone through the process, he now believes it is his role and that he can make a difference. And I think that's the kind of thing that's going to stay with that student beyond his school years, and that's really exciting. So.
One story that comes to mind, I just recently heard about in our third grade boys classroom. So we have all girls on the Priory side and all boys elementary K through 4 at the moment on the prep side. And our third grade prep teacher was doing a mood meter check-in with her class, as she does every morning, and one of her boys was actually had just experienced the death of his grandmother. And so he was able, I think in that check-in moment, he was able to express how he was feeling in that moment, and the class was able to meet him there. And the teacher was able to meet him there, and everyone was very connected in that moment, and he felt safe enough to be able to express that. Now, had that happened without the mood meter check-in, I'm not sure. I don't know. I can't say. But this was a nice way to allow for him to be able to have that space to express that experience, and I think that's the goal. That's a beautiful thing. So that is definitely a success in my view.
Well, I think what the Tribes program has really afforded us education for ourselves as educators is to understand the importance of reflection, the reflection process. And through that reflection process, what really came to light for us as a faculty last year was that it becomes very challenging for middle-class educators with middle-class values and language to have empathy for students that are coming from poverty, that have norms of poverty, and that have the language of poverty. So the beginning of this year, we hit the ground running as a faculty because so many of our students come from the Waianae Coast. We went out to the Waianae Coast. We felt what that bus ride felt like because many of our students catch the bus in and back. We visited the Waianae Boat Harbor houseless community. We were students of them, and we asked them to educate us about what our students that are coming from poverty and homelessness might be feeling. And we took cultural experts from that aina to share with us mo'olelo of that aina, so that when our faculty came back for our students, we were better armed and more equipped to understand where they're coming from. So I think I can see that really just being infectiously affecting our students in a really great way this year, because we're now, I think, as a faculty, we're really looking to, and we struggle with that. We struggle with the barriers that come when, you are safe, you have a roof over your head, and you're an adult, and you think everything's okay, and you assume that your students have that, and that's not always the case. But we're struggling. I think this year we're doing much better at learning who our students are, what their passions are, and rewarding them for their passions rather than or acknowledging their passions and their successes rather than chasing the students that are acting out.
Great, thank you. We have about 10 minutes, and so I would like to solicit any questions the audience might have.
I actually had a really maybe quick question for Layla and Mary to tell us. You talked about the finances and the real joy of having had some financial help. What did those monies go toward?
For us, our funding went towards having some of the faculty go and be trained, and then the rollout of the curriculum and the curriculum books, all of those things. So I would say that's pretty much what it covered, and we continue to. Correct, and also data. So we're able to, if there's a certain implement that you want to use in order to gather your data, that can also, we can use our funding for that as well. So far as so.
Yeah, similarly, training and also just the time that Chris was talking about is now paid for as a role, a part-time role for me at the school. So yeah, Yeah, so yes, there's personnel, there's training, there's materials. That would be the main things, yeah.
So for the, Chris, for Toolbox, is it the teachers that wear the lanyard, or is it like the entire staff, like cafeteria, office?
I think in an ideal situation, it's everyone. And that's one of the things that we're trying to scale up, because we've come to realize, well, we already did, but realizing as a school that things happen everywhere. Kids run into problems in every location. And so this year, we're now trying to get our playground supervisors wearing the toolbox or wearing the lanyards. And one of the things that happened last year is one of the playground supervisors came up to me and he says, "Chris, how do you get these kids to line up? How do you get them to do what you want them to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't have to. I just I talk to them about the tools." And so now he's trying to, he wants to wear lanyard. And so I think things like that, it is intended for everyone in the whole school.
You said that you all went out for like a visit to the houseless communities and everything. Was that something that was done, like the school did that, like they provided you all the opportunity to go do it, or did the teachers get together on your own and do that?
I think it was a combination of implementing our SEL process and then stopping, reflecting. As a faculty, we reflected on where we had problems with that. And then our Po'okumu, our principal, selected readings around educating students of poverty because, that was a factor. And our CAS was very supportive, and she allowed us on a training day to actually go out there. So it was something that it was, I think, more collaborative. It was a need that was manifesting in discussion with the teachers, and it was a need that we were seeing as admin as well.
What are the challenges that you met in trying to bring in your SEL programs, besides the need for funding? What are the other challenges you are experiencing? I know, Rhonda, you were talking about adapting to the culture, but I'd like to hear what other challenges, because I think that would be important.
I think this would go across the board probably, but time, obviously, so time to be trained and time to train others, and time, fortunately for us, that the administration helps to build in that time. So that is extremely helpful. And another challenge, I would say, is sustainability. So keeping that momentum going. So we're very excited as it's new, but hoping that over time it continues to be important and valued and practiced. So hoping that momentum continues.
Just adding one thing about the time. I think that one of the things that's really, really helpful is for teachers to get together and discuss how things are going and to build that time into the school schedule somehow. Because if you don't, it either doesn't get done or it feels like a burden, like something else you have to do on your own. And so having, that's one of the things that our funding also covered. It covered substitutes. It has covered and still does substitutes for us when we take a half day and all the toolbox teachers sit around and talk about how can we improve what we're doing, what are challenges we're having, how can we solve this, and how can we move forward. That time is really, really important. It helps keep the conversation alive. It helps other teachers see successes and hear successes that they may not hear otherwise. And that's something else that's helped with the funding, and it's a challenge, to get that time together with the teachers, the communication piece.
Can I just say something implicit in what you're saying, is that there has to be then a strong commitment by leadership to say this allocation of resources, time, money, etc., is going to be a priority for the school.
I think in the best of all worlds, that would be absolutely yes. I know there are schools who are implementing SEL successfully without what you might call a really strong, you know. But I think ultimately that's going to serve everyone better, because then the kinds of issues that we're running into, you have that support already, and they know that we need to build in this time, we need to have the funding, we need to get the training done, and they're much easier to get that. Where in our case, we had to go out, search all these things, figure it out, put it into place, and then go present it to the administration as a project. So it was a little different.
How do you bring the parents and the families into this? Because we talked about all the fun inside the school, but outside the school, the kids go out and talk to their parents about this, and how are the parents involved in each program?
I'll just say really quickly for Toolbox, one of the things that, in fact, in about a week and a half, we're going to have a tool, we call it a Toolbox Cafe. So the parents can come in and talk about Toolbox. We share success stories. We talk to them about how they can implement Toolbox with their children at home. In February, we have Parenting with Toolbox Night. So we bring in the parents and we talk to them strategies they can use. We send home lessons that the students have to do with the parents that are related to Toolbox. For example, teaching them how to use the breathing tool, or teaching them a tool, or so forth. So we're very cognizant of how important it is to get the parents involved, and so there's a lot of things built into the program that helps us with that.
Parent workshops, and I think we find that parents really like having a way to deal with problems. So they're just, for the most part, enthusiastic, and they, I think every parent has felt that hopeless feeling. My child is suffering. What can we do? And having an answer to that is great for the school, and it's great for the parents. And we love hearing like those phone calls. Wow, this really worked. My child's happier. It's making a difference. So, yeah.
I second that.
For us, because such a big chunk of our school population comes from so far away, parent involvement and actual parents stepping onto our campus is a challenge, and it's something that we're still trying to figure out how to engage, parents in that way. But I think once we flipped the way that we looked at SEL, and we began to look at it through a Kanaka Maoli lens, and we began to understand that it's not just a program, it's a way of life, which is why we've incorporated looking at genealogy, the mo'okuauhau of somebody's ohana, their kumu, as well as the aina. So when you learn, and our students, when you learn about the ko'ihonua, when you learn about the succession of the world, when you learn about your mo'okuauhau, where your family sits in that succession of the world, the parent, your grandparents, the relationship of the whole ohana is really included in what in English we would call a program, but we view it as a way of life, and really uplifting for our community and our lahui as a whole.
Fantastic. Yes, just time for one more question. We have about a minute left.
My question is, what are some of the sustainable practices that you think have been successful, making sure that this goes on and it's not just kind of another initiative that starts and then fizzles out over time?
I think the biggest thing for us is those teacher meetings and getting the teachers together and talking, and then also starting to implement. I know I was talking to Ruth last night, and like at St. Andrews, having these things start to be built into faculty meetings. And I think activities like that where the whole school is starting to get involved in the program itself. And because from there, people start to see how it works, and they start to see the successes of it. And so keeping the conversation alive is really important for sustainability year to year.
Like, what would you do in the faculty meeting? What would be the topic that you would address, or how would you sustain that practice?
Mary? What? Well, for example, we might just start, like last year in the elementary when we were doing it, we started every department meeting with the breathing tool. And we would just breathe, center ourselves, very quick, doesn't take long, and just arrive. And that's just another way to practice the tools ourselves, model the tools for the children, and deepen our awareness and understanding. And at the same time, give us a better chance of having a really productive meeting.
Should I answer it or read it? Okay. I think for me, I hope that the successes speak for themselves. And again, because the way our program works, it's a resource. And these questions are going to come up. There's going to be conflict, and there's going to be all kinds of behavior amongst students. So, of course, we hope that over time things keep improving, but also as they come up, it's great to have an approach that we feel lines up really well with our values.
I'll just say one more thing. As transition happens with the school, to have ample resources to allow for anyone new coming in to feel comfortable in implementing that as well, and making sure that they feel supported and not falling through the cracks, and document, as Sophie would love me to say. But yeah, just keeping a stable documentation on the process in case, there's just transitions and things like that, so we have something tangible we can hold on to in the process as well.
I guess for us, because of the type of population that we serve, our administrative team, our counselors, we're doing a lot of work with our faculty to identify that SEL is not just about numbers for a grant, but that the grant is enabling us to give our students social skills that will save their lives, and that will bring wellness to their life long term, that will strengthen our Lahui as a whole. And so I think with that, there's been a lot more buy-in, and through the education that we've received of the different SEL programs like Roots and Tribes, our kumu are able to identify the parts of social emotional learning within the community. So what Tribes would call inclusion, we would call coming together in our piko and doing an oli together. So things like that, I think, has enabled us as a school community to want to sustain SEL within our community.
Great, thank you so much. We're out of time. There's some resources in the back for you, and I will also share this slide with the Schools of the Future folks, and there's some resources that we linked to this presentation.
Also, just a last note, the ruler handout back there is just an example of how we sort of communicate our ruler news, so to speak, to in-house to our faculty and staff, our teachers. So that's just an example you can take a look at. Thank you so much.
Thank you.